Hello and welcome back to Sitting In. It's been a while since we recorded an episode and I am delighted to be joined by my the fantastic Sitting In team, Callum Stevenson and Jack Handyside. The crowd goes wild. So it has been a while since we recorded an episode, and what we've decided to do is between season 1 and season 2 is run this new kind of project called Sitting in Jams. And the idea is that we, the Sitting In team, we will jam a concept for about 20-25 minutes. And we really want you to be part of this. So every week we'll be asking for questions from you to get you involved. And who knows, maybe somewhere down the line we'll actually get you on the show and just answer your question with you on the podcast. That would be fun. So yeah, I don't think there's much else to say about the project itself, but what we thought we'd do to get started is do a Q&A. I think Q&As are always a fun way to get started, and we've got a bunch of questions from people on Instagram primarily. So what I'm going to do to get started is I'm going to spin the wheel of questions. We tried to come up with a better name, but unfortunately there wasn't a better name presented. And we're going to go through the process of answering these questions. I just want to say though, before we get started, does anybody want to share anything or say anything? Because it's been a while since people heard Jack's voice. It's been a while since, well, nobody's heard Cam's voice.
Nobody's heard.
Jack, do you want to say something?
No, just that we've got a lot of fun things in store, and it's going to be really exciting to just roll them out as well. The three of us have had some really interesting and detailed chats about all the things that we want to roll out and how we can get the listener sort of integrated and feeling like they're part and interacting with Sitting In as well. And so hopefully, today is the first day of us being able to roll out lots of these ideas. But yeah, just really looking forward to it and happy to be part of the team.
Yeah, same for me. Yeah, no, I'm exactly the same. I'm just looking forward to just getting into conversations about music. It feels like it's just been too long and it doesn't happen often enough. I feel like it doesn't happen often enough. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Absolutely. And I shall just say that I've known Callum for a few years and Jack for a few years as well, and I couldn't be happier to be working with such stallions. So thank you, lads. And let's get started. So I'm gonna do the thing. It's gonna spin, and we're gonna be presented with a question. I'm kind of nervous about this. Oh, great starting question. So, from Who is Greg Jones on Instagram, we have the question, what have you been shedding lately? And Greg, great question. Thanks for that. That is a question I pretty much just ask everybody. Even if I've just met them and like I know that they play drums, I'll be like, oh, what have you been shedding? And for me, it's a good doorway into all sorts. Finding out what they're shedding for one, but also what kind of music they like to play. Maybe, yeah, I don't know. Shall I start that one?
Yeah, go for it, man. I want to hear what you're working on.
All right. So, for me, practice is such a here and there thing these days. I find that sometimes I really hit it and I'm super focused, and sometimes it's a wee bit more sporadic and maybe conceptual. So I might be practicing a sort of concept of like trying to not think too much whilst I'm playing. Whereas the other side of that will be I'm practicing a tune and I'm really focused on achieving that. And right now, what I've been practicing a wee bit more is actually a funny one, because I feel like I come in circles with this quite a lot, but actually taking the tunes that I'm practicing and using a looper to practice through them. And I find for me that's a twofold kind of process. First of all, it lets me hear my comping back to myself and gives me some things to think about, either rhythmically or voicing, or it just gives me an idea how my chordal kind of accompaniment is. And then the other side is that it gets me better at playing that tune, maybe playing through the changes, the melody, whatever it may be. And this is something that I sometimes do for a while now. I sometimes don't do it for ages. Sometimes I'll just use a metronome and like only ever play through the changes and like do the whole solo guitar thing as well. But I found more than recently, maybe actually inspired by playing with Jack, because we got to play together recently, which was just a delight, is just want to work a little bit more on comping, and yeah, it's a good way for me to kind of get an all-encompassing practice session. So I've been playing tunes with a looper a lot. Who's
That's
going
really
next?
cool too. Yeah. I suppose I'll jump in as well. The thing that I've been kind of working on most recently is a lot of kind of non-functional harmony stuff. So weirdly enough, like a lot of vamp sort of music as well, which I think, Rhys, you and I have talked about before. So the stuff that you would hear perhaps from Return to Forever or the Electric Band, Chick Corea stuff, that stuff has always foxed me in terms of what kind of language I would use over it, because it's not strictly what you might call kind of traditional or a place for traditional bebop language. So I have to really rely on either creating or learning this new sort of rock jazz sort of language, which is such a funny sort of term even to describe it. But I've had to kind of really go back in my thinking and think to myself, okay, this is a new sort of environment to sort of work around. So working through tunes like what have I been working through? Charged Particles, Humpty Dumpty, tunes like this that are really, I mean, they're ferocious tunes in their changes, and they really kind of catch me off guard because it means that I have to sort of develop some new ways of being lyrical over them as well. But I suppose off the back of that as well, and as you mentioned that, we played together, and there's always things that come up, when you play with people that challenge your ways of thinking or your ways of playing. And especially in what we were working on as well, something that really popped up with me was trying to be a bit more concise about the ideas in your choruses. And I say I mean mine. But yeah, trying to kind of develop an idea, take an idea and really sort of develop it through multiple choruses. And so one way I've been trying to, I suppose, shed that in particular is recording myself, say, playing 3 or 4 choruses, and then trying to hear if I have managed to take that one theme and develop it enough so that by the end of the course, I can still quote the original melody. So it's always sort of trying to create a storyline through your improvisation. That's something that I enjoy it as part of the players that I listen to, and in all kinds of disciplines as well, and all kinds of compositions. But I suppose, yeah, one way of sort of thinking about that would be soloing from the perspective of a composer, so that there is always a theme in what it is that you're playing. And so you're not just sort of inputting random things that will work in certain places, so that actually there is this, what you might call, individual solo that comes about that can't really be, what I suppose, pieced together and attached kind of anywhere else. It really just exists within that time as well. And so yeah, trying to develop ideas through choruses has been the main sort of thing. But yeah.
Nice one.
Sweet, I'll go next. So I've not had a massive amount of time to shed, but with the small amounts that I've had lately, Rhys, you brought me onto this, was Tim Miller's 2-1 method. So it's a really interesting method of just using numbers to essentially 2 notes per string, 1 note per string, and use that through lots of different just devices that you would use to essentially paint, improvise, all these different things. And yeah, I'm having fun getting what Tim calls the profiles. There's like 3 main profiles that you get down, which are just these kind of shapes that you can apply to essentially any scale, like pentatonic to even modes and stuff. So I'm just getting the shapes down for them and having a little play around with them and just trying to find sounds that I enjoy. It's really, I kind of like that method because it takes you away sometimes of saying, there's a specific scale that goes over a specific chord. And sometimes that's super useful, but I think it's really nice to just have a method like that where it's just the ears going, I like that. Which is I think that's a really good way to work. So exploring a little bit of that and really trying to take in a lot of Matt Schofield's playing. I really like how he just works over blues changes. So I've been listening to a lot of his music and yeah, taking some little courses from True Fire, and it's a great website, but a few courses from that website from Matt Schofield, just trying to get that language down, a little bit of how he approaches changes in the blues.
Solid. It's always insightful. Like, I really do enjoy hearing about what people are practicing, because sometimes it makes total sense and you can understand why someone's practicing that because it's within their thing. But sometimes I talk to people and they're like practicing the weirdest things, like sitar embellishments. It's like on the electric guitar. Sometimes I'm super surprised, but yeah. Well, we have a lot of questions to get through, so we better get going. This one should be quite a quick one. This is from Tom Baloro. He's asking, single coils or humbuckers? If you'd asked me this 10 years, well, I don't think 10 years ago, maybe like 7 years ago, I'd straight up single coils, but I'm well and truly a humbucker guy now.
I'll side with that as well. I think I'm too attached to the humbuckers on my Ibanez, so I can't really see past it. I mean, I play single coils on the Telecaster, but I don't know. I always feel like I'm maybe missing something from the single coil sometimes. But yeah, I'm gonna have to side with you on that.
I'm exactly the same most of the time. My playing style kind of just really fits like the really bluesy, cut through, like thin kind of strat tones and stuff with the single coils. But having humbuckers, just that extra punch and the way that it's kind of translated through effects and stuff like that, it just, I don't know, there's something about the humbuckers that I've stuck with for such a long time now.
Nice. Thank you for that question. Next question is from iSax1404, who I'm imagine might be a saxophone player. They are asking, I guess this question's for me specifically, how do you use the subbing up in your playing? I love it. It's also a crazy pedal. The subbing up is an octave pedal from TC Electronic. And anybody else use that, by the way? No?
I've given it a shot. Yeah, I really couldn't get to grips with it, but I noticed actually when I was up, I noticed it on your pedal board. I also actually wondered if you were still using it as well, because you talked about it a couple of years ago and how much use you were getting out of it.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic pedal. It's a lot of fun. I find that I use it quite a lot for. If you listen to Jonathan Kreisberg, he does this really cool thing where he'll have like a distorted tone, kind of like jazz tone. It's quite dark, arch top, but he'll have an octave higher, just sort of like not even 50% mix, like maybe 40% just in the background. So I find that like if I'm playing a tune and it starts getting kind of heavy and cooking, like just chucking that on just to give everything a wee bit of lift. I quite like to do that, but I also quite enjoy, just for fun, using like the fake kind of organy sound that you can create on that. It's quite fun if I've actually played gigs as like a duo or a trio where I've kind of pretended to be an organ and played through a blues with like that pedal, and that's quite fun. But yeah, I mean that's how I use it personally. I'm sure there are a million other ways to use it. Thank you for your question. All right, onwards to the next one. What are we gonna get? There's one question here I'm quite anxious about. I'll let you know what it is when it comes. All right, cool. Joel Q, so that's Joel Kew, is asking, what standard is your favorite to play? And I'm gonna let Jack start this one.
This is tough, because I feel like I don't stay on standards for like longer than maybe a month sometimes. I feel like my process for learning standards at the moment is that I'll usually sort of take one, explore it, really dig into it, or maybe a selection of standards, say it's like 3 or 4 standards, really dig into it, start to enjoy it, and then just move on to something else. So for a while, I was really exploring a lot of the Bill Evans repertoire for some reason. I have no idea why. So I was getting into like very early, Glorious Step, a lot of tunes that there don't seem to kind of be many examples of guitar players playing. I know Larry Coryell is maybe one of those people who played a lot of Bill Evans repertoire. But yeah, I suppose recently that's a tough one. I suppose like I'd said before, a lot of the stuff like the Humpty Dumpty tune, man, that's just, if you haven't heard that as well, it's such an incredibly difficult tune to play over, but it's also still weirdly melodic enough that the melody is kind of interesting to follow. But I would have to say, what else? I'll tell you, there's an old tune that I heard on a Coltrane album that I've been listening to recently, Live in Paris. And it is a tune from Frank Lozier, I think his name is, called The Inchworm, which if you haven't heard, I can't imagine many people will have. It's a really fun tune. Yeah, it's very much kind of just a vamp between dominant chords for the choruses, but it's really worth a listen, because where Elvin Jones and McCoy Tyner, Jimmy Garrison, and Coltrane himself take that tune is really incredible, actually. So along with, let's say, Glorious Step and Humpty Dumpty, I would say The Inchworm as well. So lots of kind of quite obscure tunes. But that would be my answer. What would you say?
Callum, you want to go?
Yeah, you want to go for me? So for me, as much as I've not really had a massive amount of experience with standards, I think one of the fun ones that I used to enjoy probably was Spain. But one of the ones that I just love listening to is Pure Imagination. That's probably one of my favorite ones. I don't know why. There's just something about the harmony that I find amazing about that standard.
If you're listening to this podcast and you're like, oh yeah, I know Pure Imagination, you should definitely check out Ant Law's version. He does I'm pretty sure it's a solo guitar rendition, and it's just beautiful. Callum as well, if you've not checked it out,
I will check that out for sure.
This question is cool because whenever someone asks me what my favorite standard, wait, was the question standard to play or just standard? I can't remember this.
Standard to play, I think.
To play. All right, cool. Yeah. So my favorite standard might not be one that I can play. I don't know, but it's quite hard. I go through phases, kind of like Jack. There's standards that I'm like super comfortable with that I love to play. I always think Autumn Leaves is such a fun tune to play. It's like the first one I ever learned, but maybe for that reason I've got this like nostalgic kind of thing about it. But it's not my favorite. It's just fun. I would say I'll give you 3. I love playing Nardis. I think it's super fun. Just dark, that's how I feel when I play Nardis. Jack and I played Along Came Betty. I'm sort of getting to grips with that tune. Really enjoy playing that. And the other one Jack and I also played was Beatrice, which is just a beautiful tune. I really enjoy that. So I would say, yeah, Along Came Betty, Nardis, and Beatrice. They're my favourites. All right.
I think that's the other thing as well. Sorry to interject there. I think that's the other thing as well, that if you're playing tunes with other people, because it's great to play solo, but something that both you and I experienced is recently, I think we picked like 3 tunes each or something. We said, oh, let's play these 6 tunes as a duo. The interesting thing is the three tunes that each of you pick is going to be very different from the repertoire that either of you know. I mean, you and I had Along Came Betty in rotation at the time, so we said, okay, well, this is a tune that we both sort of know and we're shedding. But what's really great, I suppose, about playing with others as well is that if you kind of create a set list together, you start to get thrown tunes or challenges to learn some tunes that you frankly would never have come across before as well. And so it was really fun playing stuff like Beatrice as well, which I know the tune, but I've never learned it or never played it or never had a reason to. And so yeah, it's really fun. It's just another reason why as well, testing yourself and playing alongside other people and really trying to kind of do justice to the song is so much fun.
Absolutely. All right, we have so many questions to get through and time is like it's getting on, so we're gonna have to, hopefully some of these questions are easy, and this one is super easy. It's from my friend Ellie Paul, who's saying, real question, when you back at the Doghouse, which is, the Doghouse is a place in Edinburgh it hosts a really good jam session. And well, I don't know when this episode will be aired, but today it's Monday the 18th, and I think I'll be there tomorrow, and I think Callum will be there as well. But I don't think that really matters because the question is, we'll be releasing this a little bit later. All right, next question. Let me see. All right, who's this from? Oh, this is Jack's question to us. Thanks, Jack. Any advice on being more confident when performing on stage? Callum, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. I think for me, having the confidence on stage is really, I found it really tough when, my first couple of gigs that I ever had. Quite interesting because I think the first gig that I ever done and the first song that I played was just a cover song. It was like a Kasabian song, Clubfoot. It only has 2 chords. And there must have been 100 people at the gig. And I froze. My hand physically froze from just nerves. Just I was super young. I was really, really young. I just got really nervous. So I think being able to, whatever you're fearful of in those kind of situations, is just tackle it head on. It's if you're scared of something like that, if you're scared of an experience, that's more reason to just go straight into it head on, because you'll gain so much from that, because it's the deep end. So it's find your deep end essentially and try and battle those kind of fears, and confidence will be on the other side for sure.
Yep. Sweet. Jack, if you don't mind, I'm going to go here because Callum just reminded me of an experience that I want to share. So I apply this to a lot of things in life, and I'll tell you the story and kind of what my learning point is. So when I was in high school, I studied philosophy, and that was such a great class, and my teacher was, to this day, still one of the best teachers I've ever had. And I remember everybody was stressed about the exam because the exam was coming, and people hadn't studied, right? I mean, people were studying the day off and like just trying to cram new information in. And I remember he just says to the whole class, he was like, "You're not going to learn anything new. Like, just go in and just enjoy it." And to me, I was sitting there like, yeah, man, because like I'd obviously studied and I really loved the subject. So I was actually super excited to get in and do an exam, which is weird because usually I don't feel like that. But to me, it was such a creative process. So I did enjoy it. And my kind of learning point from that is that you kind of need to be prepared. Like you do. There's no two ways around just like putting in the work to like know the set list and like get it done. And I'm a firm believer in like getting your stuff together before you get on stage. But, well, I guess in turn that will help how confident you feel because you'll know what you're playing and you'll be like fairly comfortable with it. But then the other side of that lesson for me was like, just enjoy it. You know, if you've not got it fully together and you have to like read a little bit of the song off a chart or even just use your ears for a whole song, which I'm sure has happened to everybody on this podcast at least once. It's like, just try and remember that you're so incredibly lucky to be playing music and doing that, and just try and enjoy that process because you're lucky to be doing it. So yeah, that's how I would answer the question. I'm interested to hear Jack's perspective.
Yeah, it's a funny one. You know, I think this can be answered in several ways. I think as somebody who's actually experienced, I suppose, stage fright really before, I thought this would be an interesting question because, Callum, I know you're doing a lot of performing work at the moment. You're sort of back on stage, and Rhys, you as well. And I'm kind of experiencing that in both the function world and just in general. That after a long time of not playing, you can come back to playing live and think, oh man, this feels a bit different. It feels a bit strange. And you have to sort of resettle in a way. And I remember being a lot younger because I started performing basically from about the age of 10 or 11 really, and as kind of might come off as quite strange, but I used to sing a lot as well and sing and play, and I do wonder where that bravery came from. I have no idea. I think it was kind of like hiding behind the guitar and then hoping that the guitar playing would outdo the singing, which I mean eventually did, hopefully. But you know, something that you learn as well, and I remember learning this and applying this all the way through university, and I found that it's continued to be useful as well, is that there has to come a point that you trust yourself, because a lot of stage fright, as it were, or nervousness on stage comes from this place of feeling that you can't trust your ability, or that you can't trust how, I don't know, maybe not that you control a crowd, but maybe how the crowd will come across, or you know, or that kind of thing. And I think a lot of the time, the honest answer is that you have to trust yourself even before you step onto the stage. And yeah, you're never gonna completely eradicate the nerves of stepping on stage, but there is a way to sort of settle your mind and think to yourself, you know, a couple deep breaths in, breaths out, and think to yourself, do you know what? I'm on stage for a reason. People have clapped and they're waiting for me, and I have something to give, and I have an experience to share that hopefully, you know, resonates with people. And a lot of the time you find as well that it really does. And people will tell you that. They don't tell you that out of niceness. They tell you that out of the genuine sort of reception that they feel that you gave. But yeah, just trusting yourself more, that you have the ability, that you have the confidence as well. And a lot of the time you'll start to believe that about yourself as well. So the more that you can really believe in your abilities and what you do, I think the more confidence over time that you start to believe.
100%. One thing that you could have made me think of is the idea that nervousness is just kind of loose energy that you're not quite sure what to do with. And I think more often than not, if you can compose yourself and be like, I'm nervous, but let me like try and channel that energy into something positive, like just start rocking out, or whatever it may be that you're doing that is appropriate for the environment you're in, and just like try and channel that energy into something that's like, it could become like an intense focus, you know. It's like, oh yeah, like I'm nervous, but I'm gonna push that into something else. All right, next question is from Arch PK, who is asking a really good question that I'm sure we all get asked quite a lot from students, which is, when improvising, do you think in shapes or actual note names? So, great question, and I'm sure there'll be a varied answer. My natural answer to this is neither, because when I'm improvising, if I'm thinking about shapes or note names too much, it's probably because I'm not super free or comfortable within the form I'm improvising. You know, like I'm speaking right now and I'm not really sure about what I'm going to say next, but I've got the vocabulary together to make it happen. And for me, that's kind of what improvisation is about. But I would say that when I'm in that uncomfortable situation of improvising over something that I'm not fully I've not fully digested. For example, a tune like Along Came Betty, you know, I'm trying to work on it and I'm getting a bit better, but I'm not fully free with it yet. I'm probably thinking in terms of triadic shapes. I don't personally ever really think of note names unless I'm sort of doing the process of like E flat major. Well, I know where E flat is immediately on the fretboard, so I can base everything off of that intervallically. So I personally see things in like interval shapes more than note names.
I'm going to jump in here. So this reminds me of a really good quote, and if you've ever studied privately with me, you'll know that I use this quote all the time because I think it's so great. This quote comes from a guy called Dr. John Mortensen, and John Mortensen is an early music improviser. That's what he does. So he's a piano player who studies the works of early musicians, so from medieval basically through to Bach and beyond, on how they would typically be taught to improvise and basically much of the lost art of improvising. And he has a really good quote. I remember watching or listening to a seminar that he was conducting with all these students in the room. They're asking him these really heady questions about, well, you know, what are you thinking of when you move to blah, 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 or what do you do when you modulate to this key or whatever? And I remember him just saying, and I thought, man, this is so relevant because it just works everywhere, regardless of your discipline. He said, the greatest improvisers in the world are thinking about even less than you are. And when I break that down, you know, you're smiling, so I've probably told you that before. But when I break that down and I really think about it for myself, again, it goes back to the sort of the stage fright thing as well, and this feeling of being able to trust yourself when you play. And a lot of the time we revert back to things that we know are secure, like information or fear or fright, you know, things that ground us as, or, you know, or that keep us kind of alert, as it were, or keep us safe, when really music and performance and that sort of thing, it is a massive risk anyway. It all should be. And when you take risks, whether it's playing over chord changes or improvising in general, which is just one big musical risk, as it were, I think you have to allow, again, another level of trust in yourself, which is, okay, you've digested the information, you've sat in the practice room and thought about everything that you've done to play through a tune or to learn a tune or whatever. And so when it comes to actually improvising, it's really incumbent on you to just completely forget all that stuff and try to interact from another place where you're not interacting with theory, you're trying to interact with melody. And oftentimes as well, if you talk to a lot of great improvisers, of which all of us are trying to learn from as well, and we'll continue to try to learn from. This is a journey in a way. When you listen to them speak, they are talking about crafting or recrafting the melody of a song and reforming the melody. And I suppose the way in which they do that is really by trying to hear or reimagine what the new melody might be over this piece. And so I think a lot of that does come from, having a solid understanding of the theory of a tune or how you would break it down or analyze it. But it also comes from this place of allowing yourself to be free enough to compose and to make mistakes in the moment and to let it pass by and to, reimagine things. And that's really what people are captivated by. They're not captivated by the regurgitation of information. They're captivated by creativity, spontaneity, and true improvisation, which you can interpret any way, which way you like. But to me, that would really be about musicians taking that courageous step, that brave sort of step of being able to interact with a tune freely.
Yeah, I love that. I love that quote. I'll remember that one. It makes me think of there was something on the tip of my tongue. That more so that the great improvisers, that they're obviously thinking less because it might be a reflection on just the amount of time that they've spent just doing that. It's just like they live and breathe improvisation. Whereas maybe some of the people asking those questions, they're still on that journey. They're still trying to learn everything and maybe shed everything and gain those skills. But for me, improvisation wise, it's more, I'm not really thinking a lot of the time unless I get stuck, unless I'm like, I need to maybe think about what's going on or what I'm trying to react to, because it's always listening, interpreting, and then like essentially just chucking something back out. Like I'm always listening to what's going on. And then just, I feel like that's the only way that you can really do true improvisation, which is just trying to follow where your ear goes. I say that to students all the time, that if you're starting to improvise, it's just try and hear. what you want over what's happening, and try and make that happen as much as you can. It's quite a difficult thing to do in the beginning, when obviously maybe you're just learning scales for the first time and you don't know how to use them as a device yet. But the more that you get comfortable with those devices, it goes back to that thing you just said, Jack, which is all the trust. It's like almost trust in like these miniature devices that we can use for improvisation. But yeah, I suppose kind of summed up, if I do get stuck, I'll maybe think chords, I'll maybe think chord tones, I'll maybe think shapes of chords. But for the most part, it's just, yeah, trying to be as free as you possibly can, I suppose, within improvisation.
Nice one. Archie, sorry, we kind of took your question and like went down in a completely different direction, but I guess that's the beauty of answering questions, you know? Sometimes you just, you do that. Next question is from Oliver Lamson, who is asking a very specific question about what do you think of rubato guitars? And I've just had a look at what rubato guitars are, and they're carbon fiber guitars, and it looks kind of interesting. I can't see any use in my life for a carbon fiber guitar, if I'm being honest. Can any of you?
I have no idea about them. I've never heard of them. I'm going to have to give them a bit of a look up. But yeah, I can't say I have any experience with them.
I didn't know that was a thing, so I can't weigh in on that at all.
All right, that's fine. The next one is also super niche, but hopefully we can just go around and get it in. So this is from Aaron Lesandrini, I think your name might be. I'm very sorry if I've pronounced that wrong. All-time favorite guitar chord and why? So I thought about this when you asked the question, Aaron, and I'm just gonna have to say I love just playing a simple open G chord on the guitar. If I pick up a guitar and I want to see how in tune it is, I'll play an open G chord. If I'm playing Bright Side's Life, I'll play an open G chord because it works. Yeah, I'm not going to go for anything fancy. I actually love an open G chord. I could totally give you some other answers that are a little bit more colourful, but yeah, I like the way an open G chord resonates and feels on a guitar.
That's interesting. It's really hard to think of a specific chord. I think maybe just because of the way in which I imagine harmony, I find it really hard to isolate a sound without knowing where the context of that sound is. And I know that this is a conversation for another day. Absolutely. You know, you go down the harmony wormhole or the chord wormhole, and there are so many different conversations. But okay, let me just answer it straight then. So I'm going to say D minor major 9. If you haven't heard that, that is worth a little look. But for some reason, it's a chord that I explored a lot in my first couple months in university and ended up composing a lot around that sort of sound. Perhaps maybe it's just one that I was unfamiliar with, but there's something about that minor major sort of sound that's really kind of jarring, I suppose, hearing that major 7th for that minor 3rd. And then I think just for the kicks, I've got the 9th in there as well. But yeah, that would be my answer, I suppose. Callum, what would you say?
This is an interesting one for me because I think this is where maybe parts of my practice can maybe differ, I think, from like maybe just like both yourself, Rhys and Jack. But I really love just spending time with like a drone of something, like a drone of like a chord type, a chord quality, and it's almost like a kind of meditation. I could sit there for like 20 minutes with like a drone of like a major 7th chord and just paint over that. Like there's something really nice about that where, I don't know, it's one of these things that is great for getting into deep work, into deep practice, and into a deep state of practice, working over, say, a chord like that. I'd say one of my favorite chords, I don't know if the question was specific to like guitar chord or guitar shape in terms of that, but one of my favorite sounds or statements alone by a chord is minor 7 flat 5. That's just one of my ones. I just love I think it's from game music. I like when I go back to game music, it's in a lot of game music for just making a statement about what kind of like area you're in a game, or just the emotion or what it's conveying in a scene, or like a part of a story or something like that. They seem to be really important in games, the minor 7 flat 5 chords.
Super interesting answers. I feel like mine was so crap. I'm gonna add in, like, I love a good old G chord. I will stay true to that for the rest of my life, but There's one chord that also I really like, and it's just C major 7 over G, like G, C, E, and B, like that, like chords with the fifth and the bass. Like you've got my heart, like genuinely love that. All right, Callum, this is your question. Do you have different picks for different styles of playing? Why don't you start off?
Yeah, sure. So for different genres, I suppose. If it's anything funky, I just want something like a pick that's just super thin, because I always try and go for, well, I suppose not always, but maybe I'll go for like a Nile Rodgers-esque kind of tone, and I feel like a lot of his tone comes from like really thin attack on your instrument. So you can, especially with like a thin pick, like something just below like 1 or like 0.6 or 0.7 or something like that in terms of like millimeters, if you're being specific. But yeah, definitely those, so that I can just really have a loose wrist as well when you're playing funky stuff. I find that if you're using a thicker pick, there's so much more attack, and it's actually more difficult to keep relaxed when you're playing that kind of stuff. As for like bog standard stuff that I use, it's usually like a 1mm pick. I suppose it's more the kind of thickness than anything else. And yeah, just how it, again, going back to the attack, I think it's quite important to have a specific sound for the style that you're playing in, because I think that the way that you approach the instrument regarding attack just changes everything that way. But that's what I would say.
Jack?
So I typically play a lot of this. I use the same pick essentially for a lot of what I do, but I have noticed as well, and you can actually try this at home if you're somebody that just seems to have picks everywhere as I do, but only use maybe the one. So I use this little thing called a Dunlop 205. It's a graphite pick. And I'm looking at that pot of picks that you have there, Rhys, and it just looks like a bottomless pick wormhole. But I use this Dunlop 205 pick, and I find typically it's quite a rounded tip, and the sound that you get from the strings is, I suppose, quite a dark sound in a way. It doesn't react like a plastic pick or some kind of, what would you call it, like a bonded pick where it's made of two different materials. But maybe it's just to do with the shape or just to do with the feel. But I typically have stuck with that. I found that the Jazz 3s, which I did use for quite a long time, I liked the shape. I liked the fact that it didn't fly out of your hand because it had the little grips near the thumb. But I also found that the point and the material that it was made of was a bit too sharp for my liking. And this is where I think maybe I had gone down the path of choosing a pick and trying to kind of develop a sound from what it sounded like. Perhaps more just based on sound rather than kind of what it did to my technique. But I have noticed as well, and this is the point that I got very sidetracked on, which is I have noticed that when I change from my 205 Dunlop pick to, say, a larger pick, like, say, what's this here? This is like a Fender medium. So this is maybe like one of your regular size picks. Something you do notice is that when you use those bigger picks, you seem to be able to place kind of string skipping phrases or exercises a lot easier, just due to the surface area of the utensil that you're using, really, which is really useful, I suppose, in some instances. But typically, I stick with the one, really. I'm pretty boring like that. But there are times that I have noticed whenever it comes to playing with a Strat or trying to kind of get into the world of country, which I do sometimes from time to time do. It requires a pick of a different material.
Yeehaw! Well, I have a few different picks that I use. The last year has been like a pick fest for me. I've tried so many different things because I used for a while I only used one specific type of pick, but I've kind of settled on, there are 3 that I'm thinking about. I'm holding 2 in my hand. One is some sort of Jazz 3. I do really like the prime tones, and I also quite like the Jazz 3 Max Grip. I think it's got like carbon fiber in it or something. Another thing that I really like from Archtop is the 207, similar to Jack's but a bit bigger. And when I'm playing acoustic, or if I'm playing in a band, like there's one gig that I do where I have to be able to do lots of different stuff. So there's like funky parts, there's lead parts, and then there's some like rocky kind of heavy stuff. I use this pick called a Dava pick, and it's like a rubber body with a plastic tip, and it's really good because if you hold it quite close to the edge, you can be very precise like a Jazz 3, but if you hold it a little bit back, you got more surface area, and it's super easy to play funk with because it's rubber. So I have three. I never used to. I used to just use one thing for everything. But I'll tell you what, if you don't know what kind of picks you like, buy like a multi-pack and then record yourself, like properly record yourself into the computer, record your amp, and you'll realize the big difference that a pick has on your tone, and maybe your technique as well, actually. I find that when I do a session, particularly if I'm hired to do like acoustic guitar, I spend ages thinking about picks because it makes such a big difference. But yeah, cool question. The next question is from Sebo Gomez Music, who's asking, how do you memorize a bunch of songs easier? And that's a great question because at some point in your life, if you're a musician, you're probably going to have to do that. And for me, it comes down to having a process of some sort. What I mean by that is, how do you remember harmony? Like, what is your process? Is it, I put my fingers here and do this? Or is it, I know that that's the 2 chord in the key or the 5 chord in the key? And I know that for me, I like to work with a number system. Some people might call it like the Nashville number system. I just know it because that's the way that I was taught how to understand harmony. So yeah, I kind of think about everything in numbers. So I'll be thinking like 2, 5, 1. 1 becomes 4 minor of a new key, or, you know, I kind of join everything through numbers. And I find that if I do that, it's quite easy to memorize tunes. Another thing that I like to do, if I've got time, is force myself to play it in maybe a couple different keys, because I find that the number process is then I can formula myself how well I know it by putting it into a new key. So yeah, I would say that's those are a couple things that I use, but nothing beats playing it a ton as well. Yeah, Callum?
Yeah, I've got a few different ways, I suppose, but that's definitely one of them, is using that number-based system, as well as, I think, the ability to just play it lots and have that number-based system is something that can just promote maybe more confidence in playing those songs, because you've just got 2 ways of thinking about it. I think the more ways that you can maybe think about something like that, those little methods just inform each other. It can just sometimes help, I think. But to be honest, one of the biggest things that I do for practice is just listening, is literally just listening to the songs. I'm always thinking about maybe structures just by, you know, if I'm going to walk or on my way to work or anything like that, I'll spend that time maybe just listening to songs that maybe I know I'm going to gig. If I'm not as comfortable with some of those songs, I'll maybe just point out, right, okay, intro, verse, pre-chorus. I'll just try and say some of these sections to myself. As well as those other 2 methods. So again, all kind of like informing each other to help you get a full picture.
Let me jump in then. So yeah, learning tunes, that's a fun one, because I think regardless of discipline, it really does help to have a system. And both of you guys have talked about having a system that you can apply to everything regardless of genre, which is really great. And I, like both of you, use that same system of understanding harmony and being able to kind of understand how the tune still moves and works, and how the progression sort of works as well when maybe the key changes or maybe the time signature changes. But one thing I would point out as well, and I do think this is really, really, really important if you're somebody, perhaps you are somebody who's learning lots of jazz standards, or perhaps you're learning lots of tunes for a function gig as well, which is not jazz repertoire at all. It's actually maybe closer to pop repertoire, is find out something about that tune that makes it different. Something that makes it individual. And what you'll find is when you go back to that tune in 3 months' time, perhaps even 2 years' time, as much as that, you will immediately go, what's important about this tune? Well, it has that melody that starts here and eventually kind of crawls down, and or maybe it's something to do with the form, for example. You know, so I think a lot about what else aside from the harmony is important about the tune. What does the melody do that's different? What about the rhythm? So I remember, and you know, learning, for example, Thelonious Monk tunes are master classes in this. He's a composer that really makes every single song count. There is no cookie cutter method for how he composes. He makes every single bar essentially sound only like that song. And so what I typically do now, whether it's learning Stevie Wonder songs or whatever it is pick out something from that song that you just wouldn't find anywhere else. So I think about even the opening riff of Superstition, or I think about there's an intro rhythm, I think, in Monk's I Mean You, which always catches me off guard if I don't shed it for a long time, but I know it's something that's really individual to the piece. And as soon as I hear that or remember that, the rest of the tune sort of falls into place. And I had a really good teacher a long time ago who used to teach me this method, because he would play a lot of the kind of jazz minutiae or gypsy jazz sort of material as well. I was learning classical from him at the time, so it was quite jarring to have these conversations mid classical guitar lesson. But he would talk about using this learning or memory method to remember tunes by sort of mapping what the tune's landmarks were. So Callum, like you said, thinking about the form of the tune, whether it's strophic or what's the other one? Through composed. So whether it's verse and chorus, bridge, middle eight, whatever it may be. And then thinking about all the little things that make that tune individual. And yeah, that's absolutely it. I know there are other people as well that will say, if you really want to learn a tune, and I know Peter Bernstein says this, learn all the individual horn parts, learn the pianist's part, learn the bass player's part as well. And you can get really, really deep into a song. But I think if you're trying to learn a lot of repertoire or find a method that is simple to learn, and then find out what is important about that song and make it stick.
Nice one. Very good. Very insightful. Next question is from Daniel Gerliani. Apologies for the pronunciation. We have, all right, this should be a quick one. Tyson versus Bruce Lee. Who wins in a street fight? Let's try and be as quick as possible. I'm going to be straight forth here and say, like, I'm totally not hip to fighting and fighters. Like, I don't consume that stuff at all. But I would say Bruce Lee. I don't have a reason. I just think he's a pretty badass guy. So I'm going to say Bruce Lee, but like, I don't know.
I'm going to say if it's a street fight, you have to take into account a couple of things. You have to take into account that Bruce Lee will use all of his limbs, whereas Tyson will use his fists. But also you have to consider this. You have to consider that Tyson would have been a heavyweight as well if they'd fought together at the same time. I'm going to say Tyson because the guy's one of the greatest to ever do it. There's my reasoning.
Yeah, I think it's a tough one. I remember watching like lots of Bruce Lee films when I was younger and all the things that he used to do. But also like I loved watching like boxing matches as well, like all the Tyson stuff. And it still kills me to watch the time where he gets beat. But I think it's actually a really tough one. I don't know like how you measure up both of them, but I think Tyson. I would maybe say Tyson.
Nice. I mean, I really don't have an informed opinion here, but it sounds like you two know a little bit more about it. So let's just collectively say Tyson. All right, this question doesn't have a name, unfortunately. If you asked this question, thanks so much for submitting it. I think it came in via Mr. Handyside, his channel. So it's saying, is playing music for yourself or others? That's such a deep question. Like, we're not going to be able to get into the whole philosophy of that because I feel like there's so much to go. But anybody fancy starting that one?
Yeah, I'll go for that one.
Go for it.
I think there's a time and place for both. I think that, going back to like talking about improvisation and things, and then maybe talking about remembering songs for gigs, like those are two different musical scenarios where you could say you're maybe playing for other people because maybe you're just doing a gig on the weekends to make some extra money. Maybe that's just something that you do on the weekends. But there's also that, that quiet time where you get to shed and you kind of play for yourself, and maybe you're just trying to work on something and develop that something. And then maybe sometimes it's about community, bringing people together. Maybe that's not just about yourself. You're talking about trying to make people connect through music, who maybe just struggle to do that. Maybe they don't have too many connections that way, so they use music to do that. So I think it's definitely based on the scenario, but I think it's very inclusive, but it's also something that we can do, on our own, essentially, in our kind of quiet space and quiet time as well.
Nice one. I didn't want to answer this one first because I really was unsure, and I can only answer it from my own perspective. I don't want to be objective here and say like, well, you could do this or that. I think that, I'm not gonna lie, like I think I play music for myself, and I'm totally fine with admitting that. Like I write my own music and get other people to play that with me to make a collective sound, and I do feel like that music is very, like I can have the best time of my life in a rehearsal because the music's happening. I don't really mind if there's that external, like it's for someone else. But I also do understand as a sort of up and coming band leader that you kind of need to motivate people by that external thing of like perform with other people. And it is like with my whole heart that I hope people enjoy it, but I also in some way don't mind, like honestly. So I would say for myself, to be honest.
Yeah, do you know, I think this is a really interesting question. Also because you can, go down the route of thinking about it very philosophically and think, well, what is the purpose of music or art in general, or should art be something that's commented on or a comment for? But I would really take this question because I know we're strapped for time. I would think about this question really from the place of, I don't know, let's put a situation together. Let's put a hypothetical situation. So if I'm on stage and I'm playing my own music and, there's a crowd there and people seem to enjoy it and whatever, I think when you look at that situation, I've composed the music because it's stuff that I like, and I've maybe put a band together because it's people that I dig as well, who are able to kind of perform that music in the light that I want it to be performed. But when you kind of think a little bit wider outside of the box of what's happening on stage, there are things to do with stage etiquette, and people are there to see a show and there to be entertained. And there is definitely something in, how much work does a band leader or a performer have to do in keeping the audience interested or engaged. And although I can't speak on that so much, I think in the wider sort of sphere of things, people turn up to your show not because they're doing you a favor. People turn up to your show because they like your music from an individual place. And I think there's something really important about doing things that I suppose serve you first or that tick your boxes. I think it can be really difficult, unless it's your intention, it can be really difficult to compose for a situation or for people or for an event or whatever it may be. But I think something that people always resonate with is this honesty in composition or in art, which is a reflection of you. And what you'll find is, again, like I don't go to gigs to, I mean, I suppose I do go to gigs to support the artist, but I go because I genuinely want to hear what they're doing. I'm really interested in it. I support them for being them. And I think that's a really big part of art, which is supporting the voice of the artist as well, not just what the artist makes or does or performs or looks like or whatever, but really who the artist is as a person, I think is something that has to resonate with you as well. So yeah, it's a hard one, but typically I would say that you would compose for both reasons. But at the end of the day, you do compose for yourself, and people turn up to your shows for themselves.
Nice. Such a great question. Thanks to whoever asked that. That's one that for season 2, maybe we should ask every artist, like how do you interpret that? Because we all had quite varied answers there, and I'm sure other people have the same or would have the same experience. All right, so we are getting in to the 45 minutes sort of time stamp just now, so we'll try and keep the next few quick if we can, but there's no pressure. So this question is from Anonymous, who is asking, when is a healthy time for you to take a break from any aspect of music? And I'll just kick this. Jack, do you want to kick this one off?
I'll kick this one off. Yeah, this is a question I received. I think this is a really, really, it's not just a great question, it's an important question as well. And I think it's an important question in a time where a lot of us are at home still, or we're sort of in countries that are coming out of the pandemic, or that we're still trying to figure out what this new existence is as artists. And as a result, there is a lot of conversation going on about what it means to be a content creator, or if you as an artist have to be a content creator. And unfortunately, there's this other world that sort of pops up, which means that to continue being relevant, you have to continue creating or exhibiting yourself online or showing what it is that you do. And that can be really tiring if you're expecting yourself to always be current or to always be producing things. And there's a real question about, how do I keep my sanity, or how do I keep my mental health kind of in a positive way whilst continuing to feel inspired and all those things. And so it's about sort of knowing when it feels right to take a break and trying not to push through periods where you simply don't feel inspired. I think it's funny, I've gone through both of these experiences of feeling really, really inspired and having all this time and being able to produce all this stuff and music and try things, and then just dropping off a cliff and feeling like, oh man, I don't feel inspired. I should try and push through this, and maybe it will come back around and whatever, and the universe will grant me my inspiration again. But yeah, really, how do we know when the right time is to take a break from music? I think it's something that's individual for everybody. I think it comes when, I mean, a big one is, simply just feeling uninspired and thinking, man, I've got to do something else. But I think something that musicians, especially obsessive musicians, need to keep in mind is that they have to vary their lives. They have to have other things that go on that also influence what they do with music, whether that's relationships with people, whether it's just other activities, whether it's just even being able to engage in other ways of socializing that are outside of music, because you start to value music from many different perspectives because you're able to see from them as well. So yeah, I would say that it's something that everybody has a personal relationship with. You know when you feel burnt out. You also know when you need to take a break from something. You know when you don't feel inspired, and sometimes you push through it and it doesn't work and it doesn't happen, and you feel, why is this not working for me? Let me push through this. And then you become, even more disenfranchised with what it is that you're doing. But for that, I would say try to vary the things that you have going on in your life. And when you feel you need to take a break, and don't, ignore the feelings of guilt or whatever it may be that make you feel that you shouldn't be doing that. But yeah, vary things.
I'll weigh in next. So I think with this one, I find this one tricky. I'm not going to lie. I definitely, through doing too much, you just have to learn that the rest is literally part of the process. Like, rest is you getting better. Like, rest is part of that, peak and trough of like creativity. It's just, it's a total duality. Like they have to happen. One can't happen without the other. But it sometimes is very, very difficult to be aware of that when things are really busy and things are hectic, but things are good. Sometimes people say, oh, if we're always busy, then it's always good. But it's not always the case if it's just a very long period of time where you're just constantly going. So I think it's viewing it like that. It's not viewing the rest and the busyness as two separate things. It's really trying to see them as just different parts of the process. So I think when you do feel burnt out, yeah, as Jack says, just recharge. Try and recharge.
I honestly don't have much to add to what you've both said, because you've really summed up my ideas. Like, Callum, we talk a lot about the importance of rest within, well, sport or just work as well. And I really I respect time off like so much, because I know that without it, I'm not as productive. So for me, an important aspect of my week is having weekly time off. And a lot of people, when I speak to them, they like think that I'm constantly busy, but to be honest, maybe it's because I actually factor in free time as like a thing in my schedule, because without it, I'm a mess. And so this morning, Callum and I went climbing. We had a bouldering session for 2 hours, and it's like, for me, it's so important to get away from the instrument. But to answer the question, without adding, by adding a little bit more to what they said, was I think just be honest with yourself. I'm sure that, like, you've all kind of mentioned that, but yeah, just be honest with yourself. And if you feel like you're burning out, like, take a step back. I used to worry when I was in college that if I took a week off or a day off, that someone else was getting better than me. And like, nah, it's like, rest is part of the program. Really, it's so important. But yeah, I think you both gave great answers to that one. All right, next question is from Jack Chan, I think, who is saying, what do you think of many guitars? I'm going to interpret that question sort of, what do you think of the idea of having many guitars? And you can probably tell if you're watching the video that I have many guitars. And I'm not going to lie, like, I don't need this many guitars. I could happily have 2 of them and I would be set, like, really. So I'm more actually the kind of guy who I could get by with like 1, preferably 2 guitars. That's my simple answer there.
I think on that subject as well, I'm somebody that's in some ways sort of the opposite. I mean, I have 4 main guitars that are really in rotation, but I have 2 that I focus most of my time on. And honestly, whenever I play another guitar, if I take, for example, my Stratocaster, which is hiding away in a box at the moment, if I don't play that for several months at a time, when I pick that thing up and I plug it in and I play it, I notice, the reaction of the guitar next to the amp is different. the action is different, all kinds of things. My technique changes as well. And so I suddenly feel like I'm starting from nowhere with it. And so something that's really important for me is just the consistency of being able to pick up an instrument and sort of know that many of the bases that I need to, achieve my sound or achieve my technique or that sort of thing, or what it is that I want to do, whether it's just simple practice as well, are taken care of. So for me, it's all about knowing one instrument really, really well and just trying to create a good relationship with it as well. Because what you start to find as well is that having lots of guitars is really useful. Like, it can be really, really useful for you if you are trying to basically exhibit lots of different sounds or different types of sounds, or you just perhaps just want a different perspective every time you pick up the instrument, which I think is great as well. But there does come a time where you want to feel at home on an instrument. And that's a really important thing as well, is just getting familiar with that one instrument as well. But that would just be my perspective on it. I have quite a limited experience with that.
I definitely feel the same, like feeling not too experienced with just having played lots of different guitars. So whenever I jam at Rhys's, I have a field day because he's got so many guitars. But one of the things that massively changes is how I play and how it feels, which is what Jack is just so important, what Jack's saying, because it's that home. It's like, you're coming back to home if you're playing like a specific instrument. Like, I've got one guitar essentially that I go to all the time because one of the others is out of action, and I just don't have that many guitars. I've always made it work. I've always tried to squeeze more out of just having less. Be that, just playing with the tone controls, playing with the volume, changing the kind of line at which you pick your guitar at so that you can create different tones. It's all these different things that you can get out of your guitar that a lot of people might think, oh, I need a pedal for that or something like that. You need a pedal to get this kind of sound, like, I don't know, like a Chuck Berry sound or something like that, and realize that all you need to do is move your pick back this way and maybe just pick closer to the bridge, and you get this really sharp trebly tone. It's just a tiny little thing like that. That is, it's all experimentation, it's all trial and error, but it's all getting comfortable with the one instrument. It's definitely what Jack summed up for me personally. Although if I was to have lots of guitars, I wouldn't complain either.
Yeah, nice one. Guitars they're great, but at the end of the day, it's like what you do with them is important. That's my philosophy. All right, really great question from Anonymous, who is saying, what does sitting in mean? And that's something that we've been thinking about for the last year, I think. And Jack, I don't know if we need to pass this round, maybe, but I feel like we've spent a lot of time trying to find what the project is, and would you be kind enough to explain?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. We spent a lot of time, as of course, because people know Sitting In has been very quiet for such a long time, as we've been trying to kind of renovate it and think about what we want to do in the future. And hence why we're so excited to be doing things like this and back again and producing all these cool different ideas, which I'm sure you, the listener, will be part of. But yeah, Sitting In. So when we investigated, the roots to this term, as musicians usually, are quite familiar with, sitting in is a colloquialism. So it's a bit of a saying amongst musicians, and sitting in means to be invited into a creative circle to take part. So whether you went to somebody's gig and they said, oh, you've got your guitar, why don't you come on and play a couple songs? Or simply turning up to a rehearsal or a jam, that sort of thing. Sitting in is all about inviting you, the listener, or you, the guest, or simply anybody who comes on to be part of the creative discussion and investigation of what we have going on. So we hope it's Sitting In that you feel that you can have your say, that you can become integrated in what it is that we're doing here. Because although we are a podcast and that's what we're doing, we're trying to start a community as well. And so it really helps with that dialogue. And hence why all the questions that we received today, it's so great to go through them and read them and be really inspired by them and be inspired by what you're inspired by as well. So I suppose the long and short of that is that Sitting In is all about being inclusive.
100%, man. Fantastic. Very well put. And I would like to add that on the surface, like Sitting In is a podcast right now, but we do intend on growing it into and exploring some other areas of, I guess, the music industry. So in the future, really, who knows what Sitting In might be, but we have some really exciting ideas. So hopefully if you're into it, stay on the bus for a few stops with us and see where it goes. All right, this question is the one that I was most intimidated by. It's from Cass Grant Media, who is a really cool musician in Florida, actually, who I've spoken to quite a lot over the last few years. All right, I might not have much to add here, but the question is, theoretically, why do you think different people feel why do you think different people feel familiar connotations of musical colours? Whew. I'm not even sure how to start answering that. It's such a specialised question. But my limited knowledge, I can try and shine a wee bit of light on it. And I think it's something to do with emotion. And I read up a little bit about this just to get some ideas. I'm not going to lie, like, this isn't stuff that I've been studying. But it's something to do with, like, if you think about marketing, for example, if you wanted to make someone come across as like a businessy type of person, the color blue is used a lot. If you want something to be in power, red. If it's a baby, then it could be like a really light color. And I think through media, mainstream media, we've maybe just been conditioned. For example, pink is for this, blue is for that. It's like, that's not necessarily how we view things nowadays, but for a lot of people, we're being conditioned to think like that. And yeah, I don't know what the link is from that point to specifically music. There is one that people who specialize in that topic can share with you, but it's something to do with emotions and then the colors that we have been conditioned to associate with certain things. Linking that into something. Ask Jacob Collier will know. Does anybody have an idea that they want to? You do. Go for it, Jack.
It is quite a hard, wordy question to get through, because part of me is thinking, is this a question about synesthesia, in which, there's many examples of musicians who, and synesthesia, for those who don't know, is a sort of a process that goes on in the brain where when you hear music, your brain interprets them as colors, if you like. And so many people like to group, perhaps it's notes or chords or chord qualities or that sort of thing, with certain colors. But across the board, it's very different from musician to musician. So off the top of my head, I know that Oliver Messiaen, who was a composer in the 1940s, a French composer, he was somebody that he created lots of different, I suppose you would call them like, what would you call them? Like chord groupings or note groupings, that would be. So maybe something to do with serialism. I might be completely butchering that history there. But what Messiaen would do is he would group notes or collections of notes and attribute them to a certain color. So he would say that, these notes, when played together or played in a series, they evoke the color orange or they evoke the color purple or whatever. But I know that there have been some studies that have found that this is not actually, similar, I suppose, across the board with people who experience synesthesia. So I'm thinking that it was on that topic of, how do we relate kind of music to color, and maybe there's kind of the synesthesia link there. That's the only sort of obvious link between those two that I can sort of think of as well. But yeah, it's a bit of a strange one.
Yeah, no, fantastic question, Callum. I'm keen to hear your thoughts in a minute, but maybe season 2 we should get someone who specializes in that to talk about it. If you want to hear some thoughts on it, check out the episode with Audrey Busanich in season 1. We get into a little bit there. But yeah, Callum, do you have anything to add to that?
That's a really tricky one. I don't know how much I can add to that, or even if I fully interpret the question. But I think what Rhys, what you were mentioning there was the frequency in which these norms have been about, and how people grow up and pick up these norms again, and then it just kind of keeps happening, and people just kind of associate these colors with specific moods. Maybe I know that with a few people that I've spoken to who maybe have an element of like perfect pitch, they hear specifics or they see specific colors even within the inversions of a major chord. Like they can hear like specific, or they can see different colors for root position C major, and then a different one for first inversion, and then a different one for second inversion. But apart from that, it's a really tricky one. I remember not too long ago we were all in the same room talking about something kind of similar with Rick Beato and Dylan, and him being, you know, just the kind of super child with the hearing and the perfect pitch, and I think the relative ear as well. But I think it's this like kind of connection of like two things. It's just like from point A to point B in our heads, we've made an association with this sound to a color. It's just like, okay, maybe quite simply put, it could be that, but it's just that like tenfold, 100-fold, 1,000-fold with all the different colors that we see. But I've seen quite a lot of people try and describe things like that. Like Adam Neely does a TED talk about this kind of thing where, you know, throughout the electronic spectrum, if you kind of think of it that way, and you think about all the frequencies from like 20 hertz to like 20 kilohertz, that's our range. That's our hearing range. But then above that, there's all these other things that then eventually move into color and waves and things like that. So one of the things that I think he tries to conclude is that a lot of these colors in people's paintings are simply just things that are higher up on this electronic spectrum that we see instead of hear, because we can only hear from, as we say, that kind of audible range of like 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. So there's so many different takes. It's just, what do you knuckle down on, and what makes sense? It's a difficult one. It's a really difficult one.
Yeah, I'm interested in that, because this morning when I saw that question, I was like, let me have a think, and hence the tiny bit of research I done. I saw that they described F as being the color grey, like it was some sort of objective truth. And that's funny, because when I describe that key to someone, it's always a super dark, like grey, dreich sort of color. And I feel like, but for me, F sharp is darker than F. Like, I don't know why. F sharp to me is like the darkest key, pretty much. Like E minor is not nearly as dark as F sharp. So there's something there I'm keen to explore more. So Cass, thanks for the question. You always give such thoughtful questions. So cheers for that. All right, so we have just a couple questions left. This question is a juicy one. I'm not sure how much we'll get into it just now, but we can certainly go around. The question is from Anonymous, saying, how do you get a sound that is yours? And anybody fancies, Callum, why don't you start this one? You up for that?
Yeah, sure. I think I was having this conversation with a student not too long ago. I think to get a sound that's yours, it's really important to, this kind of sounds like it's doing the opposite, but to absorb as much music that you just enjoy as much as possible. Because all we really do as people who create is essentially taking our influences and kind of just, you know, it's almost like we're just like musical kind of blenders. We chuck loads of stuff in and then we kind of just spit stuff back out if we've absorbed that kind of music. And that thing that we chuck back out is usually some form of combination of those things that we've absorbed. So I think to really make something that's yours, it's definitely a combination of take the time to absorb lots of things that you just really enjoy, just things that you really like the sound of. I think that's where it starts, but then it's really, that's maybe like part of the pie, but then you need to also try and spend that time getting into deep states of just work and creativity, because then otherwise you can't really develop that sound without that portion as well. So I think it's definitely twofold. I would say that you want to try and absorb as much as you can with things that really influence you and maybe make you want to pick up the instrument, but as well as that, just having the ability to get into deep practice and deep kind of creativity as well.
Nice. My take on that is, I was actually just typing up to try and reference exactly who said it. I can't quite remember who said it, but I always think of the analogy sort of trying to draw a perfect circle, but coupled with what Callum just said, it's like you need to fill your cup, so to speak, and it's like you need to take in stimulus and listen to new music and do that whole thing. And then it's a case of trying to, in some way, maybe it's copy it word for word, or maybe it's paraphrase it, so not literally paraphrase it, but like, you know, do a sketch of what they've said. And I find that, I think, the process of becoming yourself is trying to do that thing of like drawing the perfect circle and then just embracing the bumps. You know, like the little bits like in between there, they are you. And the more you embrace those little bits, the more you start to focus on them, and the more you might start to realize little aspects of your artistry that you didn't really realize, but you kind of realized by failing to imitate or something like that. Yeah, I would say that's my 2 pence.
I like what both of you have said there, because you've taken a completely different tack to kind of what I was thinking in my mind. And I seem to, and maybe this is just a realization of recently, something that I know, Rhys, you and I have talked about quite a lot. But I'm sort of the belief that your sound, the thing that you identify as you, or that you commandeer as being, you know, you embodied as a musical sound, is typically something that happens away from the instrument. I think there's a level of confidence and courage really in being able to express yourself and say, this is my sound, this is why it's different, this is, you know, this is me. And I think some of the most, I suppose, to use the word again, brave or courageous artists that we see, for example, your Pat Metheny's or your Alan Holdsworths, people who really stand outside, or John Coltrane as well is another example. Artists who really stand outside of the general sound that other musicians were making at the time as well. I suppose singers have that as well, but being courageous enough to own your difference. And I really do think that owning your difference and having the confidence and the bravery to say, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to pursue, I'm doing this sound, or I'm trying to create this sound for, you know, the following different reasons. I think a lot of that happens away from the instrument. I think it comes from that confidence of self, feeling like I don't have to regurgitate things. I don't have to fit into somebody else's box about what I am or what I should sound like or what's going to get me the gig, but more about just saying, I'll take whatever it is that I enjoy about it, as Callum, you were saying, and just really trying to run with it. And the more I learn about that, and the more that I try to force that at the instrument, or I try to be different when I play, I start to realize that really that's a mindset thing. Your sound comes. It's just whatever it is that you seem to gravitate towards. Because, you know, no two people are truly the same when they pick up the instrument. They really aren't. So yeah, I would say that a lot of that work seems to come from just being interested and curious about broadening your own character away from the instrument. So I would say don't be too concerned about trying to come up with the latest sound or a different tone from everybody else. Be concerned about trying to be your own person, and the music will take care of itself.
Callum, do you want to add in?
No, I don't. I think that sums everything up. I think that's a good diverse bunch of points on that question.
Nice. All right, we're down to the last two. If you've gotten it this far, or if you stayed with us for this far, you are a trooper. Good job. I hope you're enjoying it. All right, second last question is from Ariel Biagio. Sorry if I've mispronounced your name. Favorite open tuning? I'm not gonna lie, I don't have a ton of experience with open tuning. I was gonna say drop D, but that's not an open tuning. I once tuned my guitar to E standard, and that was kind of fun. But Dadgad, does that count as an open tuning? Yeah, Dadgad was fun for a time. I used to try and do all the tappy stuff on the acoustic guitar, but yeah, I'm not really drawn to an open tune, if I'm being honest. So I can't quite pin down one that I prefer.
I don't know if this counts as an open tuning, but something that I in the past couple of years have been just trying to mess with here and there. I try not to do it too much because it usually annoys my guitar tech, who's like, if you're going to play this guitar and I'm going to set it up, then I want you to play it in standard tuning because of, and all the crazy physics that go along with that. So I accept his reasoning for that. But something I have been experimenting with, and I've noticed that guys like Ted Green, I believe like Lenny Breau as well, experience quite a lot with the instrument, is tuning it down. So it's still in standard, but how would you even describe it? The tuning is standard, but your lowest note instead of E might be D flat. And so you tune basically in standard from D flat. So like D flat, G flat, whatever it be from there. I can't even kind of think of it off the top of my head. G flat, B as well. There you go. E, and then that horrible sort of major third happening there as well with the G sharp. But just messing around with that sort of tuning has been really, really interesting because, as someone who really enjoys trying to evoke the sounds of the piano. It's really interesting to play around with those ranges as well, and all these chords that really they don't change much. The pitch of them changes, absolutely, but you really get the feel of playing a different instrument almost when you mess with the tonality of them. But yeah, I'm really not sure if that counts as like an open tuning per se, if we're talking about DADGAD or any of these other ones.
I'll weigh in. I've had a little bit of experience with this, and there's a lot of artists that I've listened to and tried to play some of their music that utilizes a lot of open tunings. And one of the artists was Devin Townsend, which I mentioned when we were all having a catch up. But he uses, when it's 6-string anyway, sometimes, or maybe the 7-string guitar, when it's 6-string, he'll use open C. So that's C, G, C, G, C, E. So you've got your major third on top. I don't know if he's aware of those kind of things, but the results that you get are incredible. The shapes that you can, the simple shapes that you can use that create all these just mad, wacky kind of ideas, which, I'm sure you probably thought some of that stuff that I'd played that night by Devin Townsend was a bit wacky, a bit out there. Like, there's a lot of places to explore when you tune the instrument to somewhere that's like, maybe, you've changed home, like you just don't know where anything is. You don't know how to find like any kind of reference point on the instrument, because it's not something that you think about theoretically once you've tuned into an open tuning. It's just something that you've done it probably more for convenience, and it allows that creative spark to happen a lot quicker. That's something that I just found. There was so many cool ideas that you can get from being in tunings where it's maybe like a full minor chord or a full major chord, like it highlights an entire chord, because then shapes can become super easy to move up as well. But yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Sweet. I definitely need to check out more, because I'm struggling away in standard tuning. That's enough for a lifetime for me. All right, last question of the Q&A is from Anonymous, who's wondering, or asking our opinion on, is reading music still important if you want to be a session guitar player? And I'll start that one off by saying it depends what kind of session work you want to do. I think that a lot of people think about, well, I mean, it could be the performance world or the teaching world or the session world as this sort of black and white thing where it's like, if you're a teacher, well, this is the repertoire you teach, or this is how you teach. And it's the same with session work. I think if you want to work for a big organization as a session guitarist in film music, you're probably going to need to be able to read music pretty well. Whereas if you want to be a session guitarist for songwriters in the UK who are up and coming, probably don't really need to learn to read music that much. From my own experience, I don't think I've ever done a session where someone has put dots in front of me. Sometimes they might tell me what the chords are, just as a heads up, like, oh, this is how I'm thinking about it. But more often than not, my ear takes care of everything, and I either learn it by ear, or if I'm recording a part, I just make the part myself, which is my favourite part of being a session musician. I'm not the best guy to phone if you want me to play your film score. Like, I'm really not, and I'm not super interested in that. But that's fine, because there's a world of songwriters who would, be up for working, and not necessarily with me, just with a guitarist, who don't even know how to read music themselves, maybe. And if they do, then great, but most of the time they'll give you what you ask for or nothing. And in that case, you've got to rely on these guys. So yeah, your ears are your best friend there.
Yeah, I think on that subject as well, because I'm somebody that's had both experiences, working in the studio, both with music scores, some scores that you see on the day, some scores that you're sent beforehand, and sometimes, and most of the time really, turning up to a session and it's really just, the artist sort of piecing things out of their mind, or simply just saying, express yourself, or just try things. I typically think that it's always worth having that bow, or that string to your bow, I should say. Oh, messed up the quote there. But it's always worth having that string to your bow, or your violin, or your guitar, whatever it is that you're playing. And I think especially for guitar players as well, that it's, Rhys, as you say, it's not like a live or die thing. Typically, it depends on the artist, it depends on the occasion, it depends on the music, all those sort of things, depending on how orchestrated it is as well. There are so many variables that it depends upon. But I think for guitar players, more than anything else, don't count yourself out of just saying, okay, well, I'm not going to encounter many decisions. in that it's useful, so I'm just not going to do it, because you don't want to really find yourself in that position of, perhaps you get called into a really cool session and you don't realize that it's quite heavily orchestrated and somebody wants you to do A, B, C, or D, and the piano player reads, and perhaps even the bass player reads, and maybe the singer reads as well, and you're the one that's left out. So it is useful sometimes. It's getting like less common, I suppose. You really don't see it much at all. But again, like, you're never really asked to sight read things in the moment. Like, that's just not super common. And usually if you've struck up a good relationship with the artist or with, whatever, whoever's running the session, then usually they'll either send you music beforehand, of which they just say, write your own part, or surprise me, come up with something that, that fits the occasion or serves the music. Or here's the music that I have sort of imagined, sessions in 3 weeks or whatever, see how you get on. So I think both of those occasions, you'll find most of the time, though, that you'll never be asked to read anything dead on the spot of, okay, here it is, here's your part, read it perfectly. I think that I suppose it depends really. It could be different if you're depping, or if you're doing stuff for musicals or really kind of high-end professional function bands. But typically I would say that your ear, as Rhys says, your ear is your biggest tool, really. It's your most important thing that you could rely upon. And it's usually the thing that's going to get you hired in the first place, which is how good are you at interacting with people. But yeah, that's what I would say on the matter. It really can't hurt to learn it. And it's not as hard as people kind of make it out to be as well. It's worth even just having the basics of reading music. It can be really, really helpful for you.
Nice. Yeah, I feel, to be honest, exactly the same. I honestly love someone asking me to go into the studio and basically just say, oh, we need some bass on this, or we need some guitar on this, maybe even some keys. I've had that quite a few times, even just with like friends, and then like, friends recommended me and whatnot. But I just love that. I love like just going into the studio, not having heard the track, and then just putting something down. Love it. And there's never any music needed for that at all. Maybe I get given the chord, but most of the time I'm just like, I'll just say to them, I'll get it. Just like, let me work it out. There's never been a situation where I've had to read music for any session work whatsoever. And I can't see myself being in that position, especially for guitar. I can't really see myself getting put into that position where I do need to read a score to get by. Yeah, as you both said, it's the ear. It's like that's really honestly what has got me so much work. And I think we all feel the same that way for the most part.
Yeah, just to summarize that, I think we're all in agreement that it's good to know. Absolutely. It's like you need to know how it makes sense of it all. But nowadays it's becoming less common, as Jack says, and more often than not, as we all said, the ears will hopefully be able to get you through the session. And if not, then maybe you need to brush up on your reading for the next gig and go for it. But yeah, good question, and thanks so much to everybody who sent in those questions. Like that was really fun for me. I always enjoy doing an episode where we just go through a bunch of different things. And when we start off the season with episode 1, we will be answering focus questions each week, and they'll hopefully be about 20-30 minutes. We'll see if we can keep it to that. We might get carried away. But yeah, does anybody want to add anything before we wrap it up?
I think the only thing I would say is thanks for having me on the first sitting in Jams. I'm looking forward to many, many more.
Absolute pleasure to have you both here, and I'm so excited to get this next project going. So remember, keep your eye out on our social media for any announcements. We will be trying to get this out weekly, and in the future, if you want to be on the podcast in some way, send us your questions in. And we have this idea in the future, please let us know what you think of, if you ask a question and you want to come on the podcast and actually be there while we answer it, we're thinking about having that element in there as well. So yeah, if you are interested in that and want to be involved in the podcast, either live or by asking a question, DM us on Instagram or send us a message on Facebook. Just all the usual places, we're there. Make sure you send us a message. And yeah, I'm looking forward to getting started. I shall see you all in the next one.